You check your email and your chest tightens. Your boss's tone feels off. You replay the conversation from yesterday, searching for what you did wrong. Meanwhile, 3 deadlines loom, and you can't focus on any of them because your mind is stuck on something completely outside your control. Marcus Aurelius became Roman Emperor in 161 AD at age 40, inheriting an empire stretched to breaking. The Antonine Plague was killing thousands daily. Germanic tribes pushed at the borders. Court conspirators plotted behind marble columns. His own generals sometimes betrayed him. He couldn't control the plague. He couldn't control barbarian invasions or the loyalty of ambitious men. He couldn't even control his own son Commodus, who would later become one of Rome's worst emperors. Yet somehow, in military tents along the frontier, Marcus wrote the most psychologically sophisticated philosophy of control ever recorded. He didn't write it for publication. His meditations were private notes, a dialogue with himself about how to stay sane when everything around you is chaos. What emerged was a framework for sanity that worked then and works now, because human psychology hasn't changed in 2,000 years. The foundational principle is called the dichotomy of control. In Greek, it's the distinction between ta eph hemin and ta ok eph hemin, things up to us and things not up to us. This wasn't just semantics. It was a complete reorganization of where to direct your mental energy. Marcus wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The Stoics argued that only your judgments, your intentions, and your responses truly belong to you. Everything else, outcomes, other people's actions, your reputation, your health, whether you get promoted, exists in a realm where your control is partial at best, usually zero. Why is this psychologically profound and not just obvious advice? Because we instinctively do the opposite. We obsess over what we can't control and neglect what we can. We burn energy trying to control our boss's opinion while ignoring how we actually respond to criticism. We worry about whether we'll get sick while skipping the sleep that protects our immune system. The Stoics recognize that this misdirection of attention is the primary source of human suffering. Not the external events themselves, but the mental habit of demanding that uncontrollable things bend to our will. Marcus saw soldiers die of plague and couldn't save them, but he could control whether he let that helplessness poison his capacity to lead the living. The first technique is what I call the control inventory. Every time you notice anxiety rising, you stop and ask one question: is this within my control or outside it? Not can I influence it slightly? That's the trap. You're sorting for direct, complete control versus everything else. Here's the mechanics. Write 2 columns. Left column, things in this situation I fully control. Right column, things I don't. Be ruthless. You don't control whether you get the job. You control how thoroughly you prepare, whether you show up on time, the energy you bring to the interview. You don't control the interviewer's mood or their comparison to other candidates. Real example. Sarah's dealing with a difficult coworker who takes credit for her ideas in meetings. She can't control whether he stops, whether her boss notices, or whether this affects her promotion. Those are outside. What's inside? How she documents her work, whether she speaks up clearly when it happens, how she manages her own emotional reactions so she doesn't become bitter or passive-aggressive. She makes the inventory and realizes she spent 3 weeks catastrophizing about the promotion, completely outside her control. She spent maybe 1 hour actually documenting her contributions, entirely within it. The inventory redirects her energy. She stops checking her boss's expression for hints. She starts keeping a work log. Same situation, different mental allocation. What changes isn't the coworker. What changes is where Sarah's attention goes, and therefore what actions she takes. She goes from helpless rumination to practical response. That's the whole mechanism. Attention determines action, and the inventory forces you to put attention where it actually has traction. The second technique comes directly from Stoic practice, Premeditation Malorum, or Premeditation of Adversity. This sounds pessimistic, but it's the opposite. You mentally rehearse things going wrong, not to catastrophize, but to prepare your philosophy in advance so you're not blindsided when the uncontrollable doesn't cooperate. Marcus did this constantly. Before meetings with hostile senators, he'd remind himself, they might betray you, they might spread rumors, they might block your proposals. Not to make himself paranoid, but to preemptively accept what he couldn't control so the actual event didn't destabilize him. He'd already incorporated it into his model of reality. Here's how you apply it. Before a high-stakes situation, spend 5 minutes imagining the uncontrollable going sideways. Your pitch gets rejected. Your flight gets canceled the morning of the wedding. The investor says no. The medical test comes back concerning. Then you ask, if this happens, what's still within my control? How would I respond with integrity? Concrete example. James has a performance review next week. Instead of just hoping it goes well, he does the premeditation. Worst case, his manager is critical, maybe even unfair. He imagines hearing harsh feedback. Then he asks, what's in my control if that happens? I control whether I listen without getting defensive. I control whether I ask clarifying questions. I control whether I request specific examples and a plan to improve. Now, when the review actually happens and his manager is critical, James isn't shattered. He doesn't shut down or argue. He's already walked through this scenario. He's pre-accepted that some feedback will be outside his preference, so he can focus on the part that's useful. The criticism doesn't feel like a surprise attack. It feels like a variable he'd already factored in. The technique removes the shock factor from uncontrollable outcomes. When you've already mentally rehearsed your values holding steady in the worst case, the actual situation has less power to destabilize you. You've pre-allocated your response to the controllable elements. This is not pessimism. It's psychological preparation for reality's tendency to ignore your preferences. The third technique is the cognitive shift. The moment-to-moment practice of catching yourself trying to control the uncontrollable and physically shifting your attention back. This is the most difficult because it requires real-time awareness, but it's where the philosophy becomes a living practice instead of just an idea you agree with. Marcus described it as returning to your ruling center, your hegemonicon. The Stoics believed you have a command center in your mind that can observe your own thoughts and redirect them. Modern psychology calls this metacognition. You're not just thinking, you're aware that you're thinking, and you can interrupt unproductive thought patterns. The shift works like this. You notice anxiety or frustration rising. You pause and name what you're trying to control. Out loud if possible. I'm trying to control whether she texts me back. I'm trying to control whether the economy crashes. I'm trying to control what my in-laws think of my career. Naming it creates distance. Then you actively redirect. What's the controllable version of this concern? I can't control if she texts back, but I can control whether I send a thoughtful message. I can't control the economy, but I can control my savings rate and skill development. I can't control my in-laws' opinions, but I can control whether I let their opinions determine my self-worth. Real example. Alex is waiting to hear if he got the apartment. He's refreshed his email 40 times today. Each refresh is an attempt to control timing, which is completely outside his control. He catches himself, names it. I'm trying to control when I get the answer. Then the shift. I can't control that. I can control what I do with the next 2 hours. He closes email and works on the project that's actually within his influence. What makes this powerful is the repetition. You won't do it once and be cured. You'll redirect your attention 50 times a day at first, but each time you're training your mind to default toward what it can actually affect. Over weeks, the pattern changes. Your baseline shifts from, I need this outcome, to I'll handle whatever comes, focusing on my part. Now here's what people get wrong about all of this, and it's a major pitfall. They hear, let go of what you can't control, and think it means becoming passive. Stop caring about outcomes. Don't try to influence anything. Just accept whatever happens with a shrug. That's not stoicism. That's apathy with a philosophy label attached. Marcus didn't stop caring about Rome's fate. He cared intensely. He fought wars, made political decisions, tried to improve laws. What he let go of was the demand that his caring guarantee success. He controlled his effort, his strategy, his character. He released his grip on whether history would cooperate. You can try with full intensity and simultaneously accept that the outcome isn't ultimately yours to command. The distinction is between striving and clinging. Striving means you give your absolute best to what's in your control. Clinging means you decide you can't be okay unless the uncontrollable breaks your way. Stoicism says strive fully, cling to nothing. The effort is yours. The outcome belongs to the universe, fate, physics, randomness, whatever term works for you. The second pitfall. People think this means you never feel disappointed or sad when things go wrong. That's nonsense. Marcus grieved when his children died. The Stoics weren't emotionless robots. What they cultivated was resilience, not numbness. The difference is whether the uncontrollable outcome destroys your capacity to keep functioning, or whether you feel it, process it, and return to what you can still control. So here's the synthesis. 2,000 years ago, a man with absolute political power discovered that power was an illusion. He could command legions but not loyalty. He could issue decrees but not obedience. He could want his son to be wise but not make him so. Every external thing was subject to forces beyond his reach. The only empire he could actually govern was his own mind. You face the same structure in modern form. You can't control your boss, your partner's mood, the job market, your genetics, what strangers think of your social media post, whether your parents approve, whether you get cancer, whether the train is late. The specifics change. The underlying reality doesn't. Most of what affects your life is outside your direct control. The Stoic response isn't resignation, it's precision. You identify the thin slice of reality you can actually affect, your attention, your effort, your interpretation, your choices, and you pour your energy there with ferocious focus. Everything else you meet with equanimity, not because you don't care, but because caring about the uncontrollable doesn't change it. It just exhausts you. What changes when you internalize this? Your baseline anxiety drops because you stop arguing with reality. You get more done because your energy goes toward leverage points, not wishful thinking. You become more emotionally stable because your peace isn't hostage to externals. And paradoxically, you often get better outcomes, not because you controlled them, but because you controlled the only thing that was ever yours to control, yourself. Marcus wrote this from a battlefield tent while men died around him. If it worked for him, it'll work for you now. The dichotomy of control isn't philosophy to debate. It's a tool to use every single day. Start with the inventory. Where's your mental energy actually going? Is it on the controllable or the uncontrollable? Then redirect it. One decision at a time. One day at a time. If this reframes something for you, I'll keep making these. Next time we'll talk about another Stoic principle that changes everything. Until then, practice the dichotomy. Your peace of mind depends on it.